To my next guest, we are joined with another fantastic guest. We're joined with Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse on the geopolitical stage. Caleb, my man, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I am doing good. I am doing better than what is taking place in Syria right now. I can't say astonished, but all of the people who are, a few years ago, oh my God, I can't believe ISIS is killing and chopping off these heads, to now, oh my God, we're excited that an Al-Qaeda terrorist is now taking control of Syria. It's astonishing to me, whether it was the interview on CNN of Jelani whitewashing his crimes, acting like he's a diversity-friendly jihadist, or the way that the local community in Syria, especially the minorities, have just been fundamentally ignored. They're acting like this is quote unquote democracy, or that this was a popular uprising. It was nothing of the such. Give me your take on the events that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. And are you surprised on how fast all of this has collapsed?
Well, I'm certainly surprised. The timing raises a lot of questions. It's clear the military was told to stand down. It wasn't like a military defeat. This is almost comparable to how Afghanistan, was taken by the Taliban. It was kind of a handoff that happened. And we'll understand the details of it more in the coming weeks. But I mean, we really shouldn't be surprised. How many years has it been since 2011, right? That's when the USA began funding extremists. How many billions and billions and billions of U.S. taxpayer money has been poured into this? How many foreign fighters have been trained? I mean, if you throw that much at a country, year after year after year, eventually, yes, you can topple the government. It's possible, if you put Mike Tyson in a ring with a 5-year-old, he will eventually win the fight. I mean, what we should be surprised that the Syrian Arab Republic was able to hold out this long, right? We saw that Iraq, was invaded, quickly fell. We saw Libya and how it fell in 2011. Syria held out for quite a long time due to the support they received from Iran and from Russia, but it didn't last forever. And the Syrian president is in Russia at this time, and we will see what happens next. But I did ask John Kirby 8 years ago at the U.S. State Department when I was reporting there for RT about the fate of the Syrian Christians and what would happen to them. And he just kind of dismissed it when I asked him about it. He said, "Oh, that's a hypothetical." Well, now
I have that clip, actually.
Yeah.
I want to play this clip because you're right. Because as I pointed out, they don't seem to care all that much about the minority populations in Syria. This is John Kirby.
Wouldn't the violent toppling of the Syrian government directly benefit ISIS?
The toppling of the Assad government benefit ISIS?
That would be directly to the benefit of ISIS.
I'm not going to speculate about what would or what wouldn't benefit Daesh. I mean, to some degree, and the secretary's talked about this, there's a symbiosis between the Assad regime and Daesh. And he said that many, many times. It is through Assad's brutality that Daesh has been able to fester and grow into ungoverned spaces. And one of the things that we've talked about routinely, although we haven't said it, we haven't talked about it recently, is that we understand that while the future of Syria cannot include Bashar al-Assad, as we work through this political process to a transitional governing body, we recognize that some institutions of government, for instance, the security forces, in some form or fashion, has got to stay intact, so that there isn't a complete collapse of an appropriate governing infrastructure inside the country as we work through this very difficult transitional process.
If the Syrian government were to just immediately fall, what would happen to Syrian Christians? What would happen to Syrian Alawites?
Look, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals about a situation that we're actually obviously trying to avoid. It isn't about the fall of the regime. We are trying to get to a transitional process of governance that preserves even some of the existing infrastructure going forward, but that at the end of that process gets us to a government that is that is put in place by the Syrian people with their voices being heard. And it doesn't include Bashar al-Assad.
You know, what's wild about that? He said, it's not about the fall. It's not about the fall. It's not about the people who are going to be killed. It's not about the people going around chopping heads or whatever. It's not about the Christians or the minorities. I'm like, it's not about any of that. It's about transitioning into something else. I mean, that statement is mind-blowing, considering he's yada-yadaing a lot of miserable stuff that's going to take place as a result of this government fundamentally collapsing and people being at the edge of a knife. I mean, in real terms. Give me a take on that. I mean, you asked them that question. Now that we are here in this process, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking of the words recently that we heard from the German political leader, Sarah Wagenknecht, and she said that the Syrians living in Germany, the refugees who are now celebrating the fall of Assad, they should all immediately return to Syria. Because they are happy about the results of the overthrow of the government. They should all go back to Syria and live there. I don't think they're going to be doing that. If you look at the conditions in the country, I don't think it's the ideal place for one to be. But the people in the streets of Germany that are marching around supporting this, they should now go back, and they have worked to overthrow the Syrian government. They should go live under the results. I mean, it's not a good situation in the country, and that we can just add this to our checklist. I mean, I don't want to be the "I told you so" guy. I really don't want to be that. I mean, I really wish that the Syrian Arab Republic were still intact, but we can now put this on our list. Like, they said that overthrowing Saddam Hussein was going to bring a chance at democracy to the Iraqi people. I think it was called The Birth Pangs of a New Middle East by Condoleezza Rice. Look at Iraq right now. The overthrow of Gaddafi was supposed to bring stability and peace to Libya. Well, look at Libya right now. There are many, many examples of places where the United States has intervened and said it has to bring a better life to the people by doing it. It doesn't work out that way. And I'm pretty sure Syria is not going to do pretty well. It's not going to be a great outcome for the Syrian people, all that the United States has spent on destabilizing the country. For 20 years, the USA occupied Afghanistan, and it was 20 years of instability. And things have actually only really improved since the forces the USA was fighting, the Taliban, have reassumed control of the country. As bad as the Taliban might be, things have actually gotten a little bit better in the country since the Taliban has been in power. And 20 years of the USA overthrowing the Taliban and occupying the country, and it was 20 years of instability. So, I mean, this is yet another example of U.S. regime change wars not benefiting the people they're supposed to benefit. And I guess I get frustrated. There's that old song, "We Won't Get Fooled Again," but they have the same playbook, right? That there's some leader around the world we're told is just so brutal and so horrendous, and that some people might be isolationists, but have a heart, Caleb. You got to stop Gaddafi from killing his own people. You got to stop Saddam from murdering his own people. The Pentagon has just got to be the humanitarian organization to rescue the people. And then look at the results. And usually the things that we're told are not true, right? The chemical weapons stuff about Syria was not true. The stuff about Gaddafi handing out Viagra to his soldiers was not true. Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction was not true. And the people are always worse off as a result. And we get lied to until the next time around, once again, they're manufacturing a war scenario once again. And I get frustrated with all the people who seem to fall for it every time. That afterwards, if you confront them, they'll admit you're right. Okay, sure. But then the next regime change operation, they jump on the same bandwagon. It's frustrating to see the same thing play out over and over and over again.
But do you think it's that they actually believe it, or they just don't care? Like, all things being equal, I get the sense that what Kirby is talking about is, like he said, it's not about the transition. It's about what happens next, where we can put in our own puppet, or we can put in a regime that we can work with, as opposed to Bashar al-Assad. I mean, I get the sense that whether it's Iraq, whether it's Libya, the instability was the point. Not, meaning the thought was we need to destroy any notion of this kind of front against either the U.S. or, for that matter, Israel, or in this case, both. And whatever, even if it's chaos, that chaos is better than having a leader in that position that is against our interests. I mean, is it that? Like, under the model that you're putting out as if they just go along with it because they believe it. From my point of view, they don't care. Their thought is we need to get rid of these people because these people are against our interests. But give me your take on that.
Well, I'm referring more to ordinary people who fall for it, not the government itself. But I think we should also talk about this because a lot of people will say the USA failed in Iraq or failed in Libya because they didn't produce stability. I don't agree with that. I agree with what you're saying. And that instability is the goal, that Iraq was a competitor with the United States. They took control of their oil resources. They have a huge amount of oil. And they sold oil on the international markets in competition with ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And they used that oil money to fund Palestinian resistance, etc. And now Iraq has been blown to bits, and they export roughly 10% of the oil they once exported. And they're in chaos, and they're not a competitor anymore. And I think you can say the same for Libya. Libya used to be the top oil exporting country on the African continent. And they, had a huge amount of oil, and they had the highest life expectancy as a result. And they had built the world's largest irrigation system. And now Libya has been blown to bits, and its exports are 11 to 12% of what it once was. And they're not a competitor any longer. And that, yes, instability is definitely the end goal, I think, for the forces that are in power in the world. I think that is, yes, they don't want competition. They don't want, solid opposition. They want just chaos. I think about when the Roman Empire defeated Carthage. The story goes that they took sea salt and they ground it into the soil to make sure that no crops could grow once again in Carthage. That's, ancient Tunisia. And the idea was they wanted to make sure they didn't have any opponent that could emerge. They made sure they couldn't grow any crops. They put salt into the soil, and that prevented them from reemerging. And you can argue that's a similar thing. And especially after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, there was a big effort to destroy the sense of an Iraqi national identity, to divide the population between Kurds and Sunnis and Shias, and really emphasize that you are now your ethnic group, and play them against each other, make sure that no solid Iraqi national identity could once again emerge that could be the basis of solid opposition. We look at Syria, it's always been a sectarian religious conflict. I mean, they've really been emphasizing the sectarian religious aspects of it. So I think that's the situation we're in.
Well, I guess the question is, what happens now? I mean, I guess my expectation is it's going to devolve into something like Libya and Iraq. How do you view this? And I guess this leads to the secondary question of what does this mean on a geopolitical stage? Like, Israel has already invaded at this point, and they seem to be carving up Syria. I mean, they are 20 kilometers from Damascus. They have apparently taken the highest point in Syria. Smotrich has come out saying we need to go all the way to Damascus, basically, effectively take Damascus. Turkey, I mean, these people were clearly backed by Turkey, the U.S. intelligence, and Israel. I would imagine Turkey may actually go into it themselves, especially with the notion of the Kurds. And I would imagine this group that is backed by Turkey, from my understanding, the reports on the ground that they are moving towards the Kurds. So there's going to be this expectation of a fight between Kurdish forces backed by the U.S. and these other forces backed by Turkey. What do you think this, and give me your take on that. Like, how does this shake out in a geopolitical sense moving forward?
Well, there's been a lot of speculation that the forces that are now in power also reached some kind of arrangement with Russia and Iran. The way that there was some kind of agreement, the fact that it wasn't just an epic battle that went on and on and on for Damascus, that there was kind of a standing down, means that some kind of agreement was also reached with the forces that had been backing the Syrian government. Now, I can't confirm that. And I will say, I urge people to really watch out. On Saturday night, I was live streaming and I saw in the chat, everyone saying, oh my God, what's happening in Damascus? And I saw everyone's posting, oh my God, Bashar Assad died in a helicopter crash. He's dead. That was fake news. That wasn't true. And people kept asking me to comment. And I said, I will comment when I see the final results, when I get the final picture. Yeah, I'll comment, but I'm not going to comment now. I'm not just going to react. And now I continue to see a lot of people speculating, well, Russia did this or Iran did this. And you don't know what's going on there. And keep in mind that the forces of empire are very good at disinformation, and they very much want to sow disunity among the people that were on the opposite side in Syria, and that we need to wait and get the details and get the facts, and that people don't realize that our own reaction to these things, especially in the age of social media, and the way we analyze and present things can have an impact on how events play out. And so it's important to get the whole story before you just start, repeating things. And like all the people that were repeating that Bashar Assad was dead, that wasn't true. And that was put out there for a reason. That served a propaganda purpose. They were trying to embolden the forces that were taking Damascus. And so the idea that the leader of Syria was no longer alive would have emboldened those forces. Well, I made a point of telling people, look, we don't know. That's not confirmed yet. I'm not ready to share that. Turned out it wasn't true. And I really do urge people to slow down with these events. We all do want to be ahead, right? Especially in the news world. You want to know something before other people know things. You want to look like somebody who knows things, but especially in our day and age, you don't know. And I do feel like people on our side, I will say, people in the alternative media world, people that are anti-imperialist, there's a little bit too much of an anxiousness to embrace bad news, I will say. I encourage optimism. I encourage people to look for the best outcome. And I feel like there's kind of a mindset among a lot of people on our side who see themselves as, they almost expect the worst, and they almost expect to lose, and they almost expect that things won't go their way. And, if you expect bad things from the world, you'll get it. I mean, that's kind of how things work. And I encourage people to have a much more optimistic outlook and not just jump immediately to embrace bad news. And on top of that, be more willing to see the good in different places. I see so many people that are announcing, oh, Trump, he's just like all the others. Well, there's Tulsi Gabbard, there's Matt Gaetz going to be investigating the FBI, there's Kash Patel. I mean, maybe Trump won't do a single good thing he promised to do. Maybe he will just disappoint us all. But let's give him a chance to do something good, and let's try to emphasize and push any good that he might potentially do. And I just, again, I see people way too willing to just kind of announce it's over, we're doomed. And I just don't think that's the best way to operate. That's why I haven't really streamed a reaction to the fall of the Syrian government, because I thought, well, what can I say that's going to make things better? I mean, I'm obviously horrified by what's happening there. I'm heartbroken about what's happening. I'm somebody who's really opposed what's happening there and tried to raise the dangers of the Syrian government falling. The Syrian government has fallen. Not good, not a good situation. But yeah, what can we do about it? I mean, we have to assess the current situation and figure out how we can move on.
I guess my feeling was, I got to be honest, I wasn't looking for bad news in this. I was more shocked than anything else. Yeah. My assumption was that the Syrian military was going to fight in the same way that it fought back in 2015. That Bashar al-Assad held on like grim death, not necessarily wanting to give up power. And the Syrian military fought with them, with the Russian military and Iranian military, pushing back the terrorists, the elite. I kind of assumed that something similar was going to happen this time around. I guess, to be fair, I think what people are feeling is this just shock. Like, the people who are the anti-imperialists who are looking at this stuff are just confused by what is taking place. Meaning, I think they accept, okay, well, the U.S. is after Syria, and they've been going all the way back since the Bush era of trying to go after Syria with this idea of going towards Iran. I think those people are aware of Wesley Clark saying that country after country after country is going to be taken down. I think he said 7 countries in 5 years. Ending in Iran, they see Syria fall. And so from their point of view, Iran is down in crosshairs. I think, to your point, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I think they're looking at this as a domino to fall with this notion of more chaos in the Middle East. And I think they have all sorts of questions associated with it, even though I do take your point, like not necessarily looking for the worst outcome in this stuff. Fair enough. I think they are probably processing what is taking place, and they're looking at they're looking at Iraq, they're looking at Libya, and now they see Syria fall, and they're probably thinking to themselves, oh my God, this is going to be the same thing that happens to Syria. So I take your point. I do take your point. To be fair, I never really reported that Assad was dead. I didn't report anything on that.
Sure.
A lot of fake news was coming out around a lot of the stuff. And I do remember at the time the Syrian government putting out stuff saying, no, Assad is still in Damascus. We're still fighting. All of that stuff was wrong. They weren't really fighting, per se. There might have been pockets, but all things been equal. Also, that meeting in Doha, I think people were thinking, okay, well, something is going to happen for this that's going to somehow stabilize the events on the ground. Lavrov was pissed off at the end of that meeting, which means that the Russians felt like they were stabbed in the back by either Erdogan or probably Erdogan more than anything else. I would imagine the Astana agreements, they thought that this level was somewhat stabilized, even though there were reports. Look, I would tell you this. I spoke to Kevork. I can't remember his last name, but he runs Syria analysis. And he was pointing out how in the Telegram channels, it was being talked about. The people were bragging about it. And yet there didn't seem to be a reaction from the Assad government about it, even from the standpoint of Iran and Russia telling them, look, you need to make adjustments. You need to make changes. This stuff is going on. And his government didn't seem to respond to any of the warnings that he was getting in all of this. I mean, and I know you can't necessarily get into the head of the people involved. Why do you think he was slow to respond? Why do you think he didn't seem to have this level of fight that was in him the last time around? What do you think the difference was between 2015 and now? If that makes sense, if the question makes sense.
Well, I think we're going to learn in the future. I mean, this is one of those situations where we have to wait for the whole story to come out, right? I mean, we learned a lot more about the U.S. handover of Afghanistan and how that went down afterwards. We learn these things in the aftermath. I think things will probably become clear in the next year or two, all the details about how this happened. And I don't want to speculate because I know there's a lot of extreme emotions, especially among Syrians, about this situation. And I don't want to say anything that could add to anything that might manipulate those emotions to divide the anti-imperialist forces or whatnot. And I guess we'll get the whole story at some point. We'll find out how this happened. I mean, it does appear that there was some decision to stand down. I mean, it was not simply that the military just didn't fight. There was a decision from high up that we're going to let this happen. Why that decision was made, how that was reached, we'll learn the details of that eventually.
Do you think there's any chance that this shakes out to be an inclusive government in any way at all?
I'm not thinking that's the case right now.
Yeah.
If you look at what's happening in the country, if you look at Israel rolling in, if you look at the chaos, the armed robberies, I don't think that is the case, but never say never. I mean, who knows? Who really knows? I do think it's going to be interesting because the main argument against the incoming National Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is supposed to be that she is sympathetic to the Syrian government. No, that Syrian government is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So how are they going to play that card against her? They'll say, well, she's loyal to this government that doesn't exist anymore. Well, in the past, she had the wrong opinion about something. I mean, okay. I mean, I guess you kind of got an argument there. I mean, that's that in the eyes of people that are just standard purveyors of U.S. foreign policy. Maybe that's an argument against her. One thing I do want to comment on, in relation to this, we were talking before about how people fall for it time and time again and how wars are pitched in this humanitarian way. Right. I will say, my whole life, my whole childhood, my whole teen years, everyone said to me, Caleb, you're going to love college. You're going to love college. College is going to be so amazing. You're a bookish guy and you're going to love college. I hated college. I was not happy at college at all because the reason my relatives and family members were all telling me I was going to love college is because they were from a different generation. And in the past, academics, university, that was where people went to dissent, right? It was the anti-Vietnam War movement had been on the college campuses, and that most of the population had this support the government, love it or leave it, if you don't like it here, move attitude. But the universities were the place where people learned to think more critically, right? That was kind of the role they played in Cold War America. that role has completely flipped. And now it's the population that is questioning things now, largely. I mean, Trump just won the election, and a lot of people among the population are very angry, and their living standards are going down, and people are questioning why things are happening. And the university is where you go to get vetted, to make sure you're not a dissident, to make sure you can be trusted for a job in that cosmopolitan middle class, and universities are actually places where people think more in line with the establishment than most people among the population do. It's interesting to see how that flip has worked. But the kind of the neocon era, the rise of neoconservatism was this attitude of, yeah, people on the campuses and intellectuals might be disagreeing, but the bulk of the population are just kind of blind believers in the system. And now the universities are where people are blind believers in the system, where you learn to be a blind believer in U.S. foreign policy. You learn to repeat the lies against whatever country is being attacked. You learn the human rights talking points and diversity, equity, and inclusion and all that stuff. And among the population, people are like, my living standards are going down. I don't trust the government. I'm questioning things. And that's one thing that I think is worth pointing out, that we have kind of a new setup in the way dissent is being managed in the United States. Universities, college campuses, et cetera, are ground zero for all the regime change wars. And they're also the places where people are taught that, certain things are conspiracy theories. And I always tell people, I mean, I am so tired of arguing with people where they can't refute what you're saying. The facts are the facts. They can't refute that, but they argue against you based on, well, you sound like somebody who might be repeating Russian propaganda, or this sounds like something that Russia might say. Is it true or not? Or this sounds like something a Trump supporter might say. Okay, but is it true or is it not?
Why do you think that
this sounds like a conspiracy theory. Is it true or is it not? I mean, that's the way they train people to argue in college. There's certain sets of bad people you're not supposed to sound like: Russian propagandists, conspiracy theorists, Trump supporters. And if you sound like those people, you're not going to get a promotion in this cosmopolitan middle class world. So you get vetted, and that's what the universities have become.
Why do you think it flipped like that? I mean, because you're right, that wasn't always the case. I mean, initially it was, and I'm blaming the left on this because this seems to be more of a left thing. Why do you think that happened? I mean, in the old days, you had people like Noam Chomsky, the First Amendment is for people to say things that the rest of the people, the very point of the First Amendment is to protect speech that you don't particularly like. Nobody needs to protect speech that everybody likes. You used to get lefties who used to dissent, like even Martin Luther King, for God's sake. I mean, like, people forget he was a socialist. On top of that, I mean, they even carved that aspect of who he is out of it and just break it all the way down to civil rights. How do you think it got to be that way? If you listen to, for example, the Democratic Party today, the Democratic Party, they associate this notion of being left with diversity. And I don't mean diversity in a negative sense. I mean it in the sense where you're carving up nationalities as if these things are very different from each other, despite the fact that all of them have this kind of economic base that everybody cares about the economics of these things. I've noticed that among Democrats, they would say, well, that sounds like Putin, or that sounds like the Syria apologists. And you're right, where I would point out, yeah, but it's true. Like, regardless of who says it, Hitler likes dogs. Okay, so just because you're a dog lover doesn't mean you also like Hitler. That's not really the case. You may say something that just so happens to be a true thing. Just because Putin believes 2 + 2 is 4 doesn't mean it's not 4. It's kind of that assessment. Where do you think that degradation of thought has come from? I mean, do you think that's something that is being pushed by schools or just a liberal thing? I mean, I see this more among liberals than I do among anybody else on the political spectrum.
Well, I think there's been an economic shift since the Cold War. During the Cold War, what held U.S. society together was a very comfortable industrial middle class of auto workers and steel workers and people who worked in good paying industrial jobs who had a very high standard of living. And that kind of bought their loyalty to the American government and the American system, right? And we don't have that anymore. I mean, since the 1980s, especially, and more especially since the 2008 financial meltdown, we just don't have that stable, prosperous industrial middle class we once had. So the people who may have been part of that at one point, who lived a comfortable life, and they're not there, and they're not getting that comfort. The other thing is that I think, during the Cold War, the universities kind of played the role almost of like the troubleshooter of U.S. society. Their job was for people that got education, and they were there to kind of point to the problems in U.S. society and fix them, and be kind of the critic who was there to kind of make things better. Whereas now, the universities, I think, are a part of the apparatus of maintaining the institutions of the U.S. society that do exist, right? It's not like they're there to play the role of the critic. They're more there to kind of vet people for roles in this kind of government bureaucracy, or in the NGO apparatus, or in the kind of institutions that carry out these policies, which are now much more essential. The NGOs, the foundations, et cetera, they are very, very essential in maintaining the situation. So I think that's important as well.
It is weird. It is very bizarre. And that's, like I said, I see this more among liberals than anyone else on the political spectrum, especially with Trump coming into play, where, it's like it's Trump derangement. They don't understand why they lost. Like, all of this stuff comes up where they think, okay, well, the American public is just stupid. The working class has abandoned the Democratic Party, and they don't seem to understand why. Like, they really do seem to be in this kind of bubble of sorts where they can't necessarily figure out why the public is the way that it is. I want to back up something else you said. Trump thing. I have left an open mind for Trump, even with some of these picks that he's made. I am hoping that he fulfilled, at the very least, some of his campaign obligations, such as ending the war, such as being willing to make peace as opposed to war. I mean, the first time around, he was willing to make amends with North Korea. North Korea stopped firing missiles in the Sea of Japan. For me, that was proof of concept that a peace policy could work if indeed the leader of the country went with that particular policy. The country made a decision that they wanted Trump, regardless of what Trump does. He advocated this idea, I'm going to end wars, not start them. It seemed that the public agreed with him on that premise, in which case the public, at the very least on foreign policy, thought he was the better option. You have a event coming up. Please tell the audience about it. I'm going to be at that event with you. I told you I was going to be there. I'm going to be there. Short of me being on a hospital gurney, I will be at that event with you. This is taking place on January at the inauguration of Donald Trump. Explain it to the audience. What is it, and why are you coming up with the idea to do so?
Well, January 20th is the day of the inauguration. And so that evening, we're having a reception in Washington, D.C. at Hilton Garden Inn. There'll be nice food there. There'll be different speakers, different music, etc. And it's just a couple blocks from the White House. It's put on by our organization, the Center for Political Innovation. We are hoping that Donald Trump will continue his efforts to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. We're also proposing that he build a bridge connecting Alaska and Russia, the Peace Bridge. And we've been putting that forward. And we intend to be at the inauguration, doing outreach to the crowds of Trump supporters in the morning. And then that evening, we're having kind of an open house reception at Hilton Garden Inn, just a few blocks from the White House. And we're going to have a nice buffet of food, and you're going to be there among other friends and allies of our organization. And it should just be a nice, fun, relaxing evening to meet other anti-imperialists and to give some perspective to how we can engage with the new administration about trying to bring peace and multipolarity to the world. And so I'm really glad that you're going to be there, Jamal. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say and meeting you, and other people will be joining us. We're figuring out exactly who the other speakers and guests will be, but it seems like it's going to be quite an event. So we just did the public announcement yesterday. And it's going to be nice. It's going to be good.
No, man, I am looking forward to it. And I think you're right about this. Like, I don't think people should immediately take the perspective that because of the people who Donald Trump putting in office, that immediately means he's going to blow off all of his campaign promises, or for that matter, he's going to abandon what he said over the course of the campaign. I mean, when Donald Trump was having a conversation with Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump was very clear. These wars have not served us. We've spent $10 trillion for what? What have we gotten out of it? We had to pull out of Afghanistan. In many of the other cases, the Middle East has become a basket case, meaning just on fire based on our policies. That needs to stop. And so I'm hoping deeply hoping that that's not necessarily something he immediately flips on. That once he gets in office, he said, even after he won, he said, I'm going to fulfill my campaign promises. I'm not going to ignore them. And one of those main ones was peace. I'm going to be a peace candidate, even in Syria. I mean, Donald Trump gets Syria wrong. I mean, he pointed out, he was like, yeah, we shouldn't have anything to do with it, missing the fact we have had something to do with it going all the way back to the Bush administration. But that being said, his instincts in it, the first time around was to pull out, even though he stole the oil. His instincts were to kill Obama's program, was to pull out of Afghanistan, was to make peace with North Korea. Hopefully he continues that. I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on this.
Well, we got to do our best. I mean, we have really no choice. I was on a channel and somebody was critical of what I'm saying about this, and I said, look, what should we do, right? I mean, somebody just got elected. They promised a lot of good things. They've appointed a lot of people that we're not thrilled about, but there's some other people that maybe are where we're at or closer to where we're at on some things. We just got to do our best. That's all we can do. We have to intervene. And I tell people, don't be the Simpsons. Don't just reduce yourself to being old man yells at cloud, right? You gotta think that we can make a difference. So I really enjoy these conversations, Jamarl. I do appreciate the opportunity to come on. Thank you very much.
No, man, I appreciate it. Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His last book, or his book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, is an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, where can people find you?
Well, my organization is at cpiusa.org. We're the Center for Political Innovation. And I got my personal website, calebmaupin.net, CALEBMAUPIN.net. So check us out. Yeah. Always trying to engage with other people about how we can oppose globalism, imperialism, and stand up for working families.
Caleb, always appreciate you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everything that comes out of your mouth. You're very insightful, to put it mildly. Thank you for this.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. We have come to almost the 9 o'clock hour. Margaret Kimberly is